Hi, welcome back to Storytime with Dad Booker. Today we're going to finish up another chapter in Sheriff in a Small Town. We're getting near the end, so let's get busy. A few days after, a youngish man came into the general store looking for work. The clerk at the register pointed him over to Mr. Calafario's office. In the office, Mr. Calafario asked if there were any references. The man handed over a short list. He called the first name. The short conversation must have been complimentary, as Mr. Calafario hung up the phone grinning. Well, Scott, after what I've heard, I'd be a damn fool not to hire you. I'm curious, though, since they spoke so highly of you, why'd you leave? Well, my dad lives around here, and he's going through a rough patch. Figured it was my duty to come home and help him out. Mr. Calafario appreciated this kind of thinking and set Scott to work stocking shelves and performing deliveries. Scott felt it had been a good idea to stop at the post office earlier, as there was a large map of the town that made deliveries easier. After a couple of days, he didn't need to check it anymore. The deliveries were usually to the same houses, and he got to know the people pretty well. He had also gotten a room at the Y as instructed and found a cafeteria a good source of information about the town and area. Within the first week, he sounded as though he'd lived there all his life. Calling in to report his progress, he received instructions for the rest of the month. Talbot and Michaela were on a shopping spree for baby items in the general store when he got his first glimpse of Scott. Talbot was good at faces and recognized most of the town at sight. The fact that there was someone here he couldn't place made him curious. As Michaela continued shopping, he went over to meet the young man. Hi, you must be new in town. Just wanted to say hi and welcome. Scott rose from his squatting position and held out his hand. Thanks, sir. Seems like I've been welcomed to just about everybody. I've never seen a friendlier town. Talbot looked around the store. Yeah, I agree. Not to say we don't have occasional problems, but in a town like this, trouble just makes the town closer. Looking at Scott, he noticed that he'd look more appropriate in a city than a small town like this. What brought you into this town? Scott told about his father's problem and how he came running back as soon as he'd heard. Talbot expressed sympathy on hearing Scott's father was having problems. Well, whereabout is he? Maybe we can help him out. Talbot missed the quiver that came over the young man's body, since the man answered smoothly, over off the Lancaster Road. He's kind of a hermit, doesn't care for company. Talbot nodded understanding. Well, we won't go and disturb him then. Let the sheriff or me know if you need anything. Talbot left to rejoin his wife. Scott cast a wary eye over Talbot as he went to rejoin his wife. Squatting back down to resume his stocking, he was thinking hard. He'd picked a road for his father that was secluded enough that it probably would fit the bill as being owned by a hermit. He just hoped nobody would think of going and checking. He'd seen the place once on a run. Lonely place without another house around for a good quarter mile. Deputy seemed satisfied with his story, so he felt he was safe, at least on that score. Talbot dropped Michaela home and spent a while bringing in all the baby furniture and clothing. Finished, he left Michaela to sort out where she wanted everything and went rushing off to work. Rocky listened to Talbot's meeting with a new arrival in town. Yeah, sorry to hear his dad's on hard times. Wonder if they need anything. He pulled out a notepad. He pulled a notepad forward. Where'd he say his dad lived? Off the Lancaster Road. Rocky's head snapped up. Say that again. Talbot came over to the desk and bending over it, he said, so he and Rocky were face to face, he articulated slowly, Lancaster Road. Rocky scratched its head. Funny that. Well, the place on Lancaster is my old place. Rocky and Talbot got the squad car. Short drive and Rocky stood outside his old home. Morton hadn't changed it much. Patch of tomatoes was new. Bit more gravel in the drive, but other than that, the place was much as he had left it. Taking his spare key, he opened the door. A slight coating of dust on the table was the only sign that the place hadn't been occupied in a while. The floor was covered in sheets and well protected. Morgan was now living in rented lodgings as he taught classes at Lake Logan Community College. He'd be coming back for weekends soon and also school breaks. I kind of thought we might have had a squatter living here. Rocky closed and relocked the door. Looks as though they just used this address since it was out of the way and looked unused. Just dumb luck it happened to be my old place. On the way back, they tried to figure out what Scott was here for. If it was for something illegal, they'd have to figure it out fast. One thing that always amused Rocky and Talbot was a constant flow of gossip that came through the office. For some reason, the sheriff's office was like an old Cracker Barrel in the general store. People came and went just to tell them about things going on in town. Newcomers were given intense scrutiny for a week or so, and Scott was no exception. By the end of 7 days, they had learned where he was staying, what he usually had for lunch, where he went, and what he did off work. Surveillance on their part was totally unnecessary. On their rounds of the town and the outskirts, they saw him quite a bit. When Mr. Califario picked up the payroll from the bank, Scott accompanied him as bodyguard. Not that Mr. Califario had requested, but when Scott offered to ensure his safety, he shrugged and let him come along. On the walk, Scott warned his manager about being so regular. Sir, it's just asking for trouble. Anyone who knows your routine would know when to try and rob you. Mr. Califario grinned and patted Scott on the back. You and the other bank tellers are always concerned. I've been doing the same thing for 15 years now, and it's never been a problem. But since you're concerned about it, though, which I appreciate, you can trot along with me whenever I have to do any business banking. He grinned as he looked at his concerned employee. Out of all the people who worked for him, Scott seemed to be always on the lookout for trouble. If an argument happened between a cashier and a new customer, Scott would intercede and smooth things out. He had a natural gift for solving problems. Mr. Califario stopped mid-stride as inspiration took hold of him. Tell you what, Scott, I think I'll put you in charge of the security of the place. Yeah, you're doing a good job handling problems, and the cashiers have told me that they feel safer with you there. Tell you what, we'll get you a badge and everything. The idea was a shock to Scott. Nobody had ever treated him with that much trust. Scott thanked him, but requested not to wear a badge. That would make me stand out, and I wouldn't be as effective as I have been. I can slide in smooth when there's problems, and then slip back into work mode when there isn't a problem. Mr. Califario laughed. Well, have it your own way, but expect a raise starting next week. In fact, I'll give you a bonus since you've pretty much been doing the job since you started. That night at his room in the YMCA, Scott phoned in a report on his current standing. His new status was met with a chuckle of approval from the other end of the line. Everything's going as planned. Just keep up the good work. This is going to be safe, easy, and net us a good profit for a while. The chuckling continued as Scott hung up the phone. After dinner, Scott decided a night out would clear his head. Out walking, he almost collided with a young lady outside the theater. Apologizing, he walked around her. Scott, wake up! She ran up to him and got in step. You okay? You seem kind of preoccupied. Is there anything I can do? Scott stopped and looked at Mary Sue without recognition. Suddenly her face slotted into place. He'd seen her working at the Y. She was an attractive, doe-eyed girl with red gold hair that hung in ringlets down to her waist. He hadn't really taken a good look at her when she was working. Tonight, though, she wasn't wearing her uniform. She wasn't even wearing any makeup, but without it, she seemed far more attractive. Her beauty was enhanced in the glow from the streetlight. Perhaps it was the way her hair was hanging loose, or maybe it was the warm smile she was giving him. But whichever it was, he felt his heart start to beat a little harder. I'm just wishing for a friend. It's a nice night out, but be better with some company. She put her arm through his and led him back to the way they'd come. At the theater, she purchased 2 tickets for A Fish Called Wanda. It was a movie Scott had never heard of, much less would consider seeing. A movie about a fish? He shrugged and bought the refreshments for them and followed her to a couple of seats. As they watched the film, he began to relax. It was a comedy and much better than what he expected. Things got even better when Mary took his hand and placed his arm around her shoulder. Walking around town and talking with Mary, Scott was surprised at how much he was learning about her. She really seemed to want to get close to him. He found the idea intriguing. Walking her home, he stopped at the door, said goodnight, and turned to walk away. A hand clutched his arm and swung him around. She was standing there with pain in her eyes at the abruptness of his departure. Sensing what she wanted, he gathered her into his arms and kissed her. The kiss lingered as they held each other closer. When they parted, his voice was husky and certain. Can I see you again? The smile she flashed told him enough before she spoke. Be here tomorrow at 7? He nodded, gave her a quick, barely touching the pavement. The weeks passed quickly, and at the end of the month was fast approaching. Scott had been calling in instructions. In 3 days, his boss would be taking the monthly deposit. In the meantime, he'd been spending all his time off with Mary. Mary adored him, but could never work out for sure if he returned her feelings or if she was just something to play with. The day before the end of the month, they were out together. Sitting at a bench, he had been unusually distant, feeling as if he didn't know or care that she was there. She got up. His hand lashed out and brought her back. She sat back down, a little disgruntled at his lack of attention. He turned to her with such a mournful look in his eye that it made her immediately sympathetic. Still gazing deeply into her eyes, he opened his mind and heart to her. Look, I have to go. I don't want to, but if I stay, it's not going to work out well for either of us. She held him close to her and simply said, Don't go. He stood up, torn between leaving town and facing out what he had in mind. Mary, if I stay, there's something I have to do. I can't explain, but it will mean money and a future for us. If I don't do it, well, then I have nothing, and you'll have no reason to be true to me. They walked to Mary's home. She held him, looking up into his eyes, and waited. He shook his head. Not yet. It all depends on what I decide. With a swift turn, as he walked away, walking faster with every step until her last sight of him was running at top speed around the corner. In the morning, Mary knocked on Scott's door. She was not allowed to mingle with the men who stayed at the, and if she was caught, it would mean instant dismissal, but this was too important. Using her passkey, she quietly opened the door. Scott was not there. The room was clean and tidy. Nothing there anywhere except in the desk drawer, a lone $20 bill. Sitting on the bed, she quietly cried as her heart began to break. Scott was at work as usual and keeping an eye on everything. Kept a constant eye on the clock, and as the time worked towards 10 o'clock, he felt signs of tension. Everything was set for what was to come. If it came off, it would mean a great deal to his future. If not, well, it also would mean a great deal just negatively. He reminded himself to relax, to act as if everything was just as it should be. Nothing would happen here. It would happen on the way to the bank. The clock minute hand swung on to 10 o'clock sharp as Mr. Calafario stepped out of his office with an old beat-up metal lunchbox. To anyone who didn't know him, it would seem as if a workman was going on his lunch break. Mr. Calafario headed towards the door and was joined by Scott. No word needed to be said. It was now part of his duties to accompany him. As I walked down the street, Scott was finding it harder to remain calm. His anxiety was beginning to show. Scott, what's gotten into you? You jumpy as a cat on a hot tin roof. Scott apologized. They were almost at the bank, just past the alley and then half a block. If anything was going to happen, it would be soon. As I passed the alley, Scott saw a shadow from behind the dumpster, stretched out and moved forwards. A gruff voice spoke quietly, and over the lunch box from Mr. Calafario's trembling hand. Mr. Calafario looked with alarm at Scott, sure he had been betrayed by someone he felt he could trust with anything. From behind Scott was another voice that was duplicated by the one in the alley. Well, that's enough. Put up your hands. Rocky was behind the man in the alley, and Talbot was behind Scott and Mr. Calafario. Talbot walked the two men to the bank, and Rocky escorted his man to the courthouse. After making the deposit, Talbot escorted them to the courthouse as well. As they approached, the door was opened by a state policeman with Mr. Smith in tow. He started to say something, but his voice was lost as they shoved him into the squad car and slammed the door secure. Scott and Mr. Fario were seated in front of the sheriff's desk drinking coffee. Mr. Calfario, you've got a unique man working for you. He had it all doped out how a robbery was going to happen. Apparently he's been taking out the young lady who does the room cleaning at the Y, and she told him about the paper she had found. He came to me to learn more about it, and putting two and two together, that action wouldn't be until the day's deposit. Just out of curiosity, how much was it? $40,542. Oh, and 11 cents. Talbot whistled. That's a hell of a lot of money to be carrying around like that. Mr. Calfario shrugged. I wasn't worried. I had Scott here. He turned to look at Scott. You had me worried, though, when you took that box from me. Thought maybe you were in on it. Damn glad I was wrong. He got to leave. Rocky said he needed Scott to stick around as he had some paperwork that needed to be filled out. Mr. Calfario gave Scott the rest of the day off with pay and headed back to the store. Scott looked sheepishly at the sheriff. He started to stammer out thanks, but was halted by Rocky. Scott, I've done a little research into your past. Well, that and your dad's. It's hard to be saddled with the black sheep of a father. The one time you went to jail, he was the one who put you there. You took the fall for his actions. Once I understood how you were trapped, I understood that you risked coming to me and Talbot. Well, you're in the clear, and we'll see that your name doesn't show up in the trial. We have enough evidence on both sides to make the charges stick without bringing you into it. Talbot came up and whispered in Scott's ear something that made him laugh. Rocky released him, and Scott ran to the door and wrenched it almost off the hinges. From outside came a yell of delight and the sound of embracing. Talbot sat in the chair Scott had vacated. Hell, she's been peeking in the window since he came in. I guess Logan County has a new resident. All right, so that's it. The next time we do a reading is just going to be the rest of the book, so we'll be done. So I appreciate you being here. Hope you'll be here for the next reading. Be good yourself. Take care. Bye.